My name's Gary Schindel, and I'm, I guess, the chair of the Luminary Committee, which is composed of me and the president of the NSS, and we're looking for more people to help us with the Luminary series. And if you are so interested, please see me after the talk, and I'd be happy to tell you what's involved. So, okay. Annette has asked me to keep the introduction short, so I'm very pleased to introduce Annette, Dr. Annette Engel, who is a professor at the University of Tennessee, Knoxville. So thank you very much for coming, Annette.
Before you start,
your Hawaii Ohana would just like to say congratulations.
Thank you. No. Thank you. Thank you for the very short introduction, Gary. There's a big long write-up, and you're welcome to read it. Or you can just sit here and sit back and relax and enjoy the ride. That was my crazy life so far. First thing I want to do is for you to close your eyes. And since it's bright in here, you might have to really imagine. But I want you to think about the first time you saw complete darkness. How long ago was that? 40 years ago? Yesterday? It's a very unique sensation, complete darkness. You may hear dripping. You may hear the sound of a bat flutter by. You may hear somebody's growling stomach next to you, right? That sensation, all the other senses except your sight are heightened. No other profession, no other hobby allows us to get that feeling except for caving. Like honestly, caving is where you can really get in touch with all of those senses, all of your body movements, all of that feeling. And we have a responsibility as cavers, because we have that unique ability to go underground, to be in complete darkness, to be inside the earth, to share it with the rest of the world. 25% of the world, that's like 2 billion people, depend on water that comes from karst systems and underground. We find human remains. We find cultural resources in caves. We know ecosystems live underground. And so by us going into the caves, we have a duty, a responsibility to tell others about it. So in my talk today, I'm going to go through what inspires me, and it inspired me along my path, but also the champions that help push me. Oh, you can open your eyes now, sorry. And then our responsibilities, what my responsibilities I feel have been, and then maybe you can see some responsibilities that you can take on to help share with the world these unique places that we go to that are nowhere else, these unique feelings that we have when we're in a cave, these beautiful things that we see, these unusual animals. All of this has to be shared in some way. So you can hopefully see yourself in some of these ideas and take it back to your community, your cave clubs, your family, the NSS, and share them. So my story begins like everybody else's. I was born. I didn't get hatched or anything. I was born December 21st, 1972, and that meant I was a Christmas baby. My birthday cakes always had poinsettias on them, and red and green. My parents were working class. They grew beautiful gardens and pickled and canned their own food. They raised hunting dogs. We went to church every week, and they took us on trips nearby. Gas wasn't very cheap. And we went to places like Hocking Hills, which is shown here on the left, and also to commercial caves. And according to my mom, those were probably pretty impressionable on me because, of course, I would grow up loving caves. So my parents, here they are, Ron and Marie. My mom was a second-generation immigrant in the country. They spoke German in the household. And her father's family, however, was 1500s in the United States, and go all the way back to the Virginia colonies. And depending on which family story you hear, maybe the family history goes back to the original people of America. My father's side is a long West Virginia history that goes back to the 1600s. If I tell you and you know anything about genealogy in West Virginia, I have Whites. So the Whites of West Virginia in my line. It's very close. And also Summers, obviously. Summersville, Summers Fork, Summers County. That's also my family. So, and we visited West Virginia multiple times a year. So I grew up here in the hills. And because of that, I would say that my parents let me be crazy when I was a kid. They were my first champions. They were the ones that first pushed me. And don't let this sweet face lie. She was a rat. She, by the age of 3, she was bringing every gravel pebble from the yard or the driveway into the house and piling them up and sorting them into colors. And, you know, what do you do with a 3-year-old that collects rocks? Well, I guess you either take them back outside or you let them pile up. And my parents kind of just tolerated it, which I feel like very grateful for. When I was like 8 or 9 years old, they, I guess, wanted to get rid of me for a summer, and they sent me away to sleepover camp. And that was fun. It was good. We went hiking, we learned how to canoe and, you know, sort of make string art and all this stuff, but I got pretty bored about it. And when I was 12, I told them I was kind of bored with the sleepover camps. I wanted to do something more important and better and more interesting and more high adventure. And it turns out that our church sponsored caving camps, high adventure camps where we would learn to rappel, learn to canoe, learn to do all these like risky things like caving and rappelling at the same time, maybe swimming in caves. And I was like, I gotta go. And they were like, we don't have any money. And I was like, please, 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 please. And then they said, okay. So they drove their 12-year-old daughter and left her with a bunch of strangers in Kentucky for a few weeks in the summer. And that's amazing. And it was awesome. It was so awesome. The first place that they took me to for these camps was at Carter Cave State Resort Park in Kentucky, in northern Kentucky. And then they, in subsequent years, as I got more advanced and learned how to cave better, I became a counselor, and then I became one of the leaders, and all the way up through when I started college. And we went to Seneca Rocks, so not that far from here, and I've been caving in Rudolph and Pendleton counties since I was basically 13 years old, Sinks, Bowden, all of them. I also learned about Rockcastle County when I was probably 15 years old. That was where camp was. So Rockcastle County is in south central Kentucky and has world-class caves as well. So by the time I got to high school, I was pretty much sold on this is what I do. I'd go caving in the summer, and I loved it, and I wanted to just do that for the rest of my life. By the way, my first cave was Laurel Cave in Carter Caves in Kentucky, and my complete darkness experience was in Saltpeter Cave, which is also in Carter Caves. So, and that was when I was 12 years old, so do the math. The first year that I went caving also was pretty awesome because I met real cavers. They belonged to the Wittenberg University Speleological Society, which is centered in Springfield, Ohio, and they called themselves the WUSs, so the acronym for Wittenberg University Speleological Society, WUS. They were led by Dr. Horton Hobbs III, and he's a biology professor. And as a kid crawling around in a cave and encountering these folks, it was amazing, because we were using the maps that this caving club, this grotto, was producing. So right in the center bottom, let's see if I can get this together. There we go. Wittenberg University Speleological Society. And I was just like, oh my gosh, these guys are heroes. They're my idols. I gotta be like them. So when my parents picked me up, I couldn't stop talking about Dr. Hobbs, Dr. Hobbs, Dr. Hobbs, Wittenberg University, I'm gonna go to Wittenberg University. And they thought I was concussed. Honestly, they thought I hit my head, fell off a rock, did something. But I was going to be a caver, no doubt about it. I was going to be a professor, because that's, of course, who gets paid to go caving in a 12-year-old's mind. And I was also going to be a geologist and make a bunch of money. So that was how my whole story started. I did go to Wittenberg. Luckily, I had some brains, got a few scholarships, and took out a ton of federal loans, both my parents and myself, and I was able to go. Wittenberg was pretty pricey. It's a private school. But I did become a scientist, and I did become a geology major. I minored in Spanish, and I worked every week practically with Dr. Hobbs. From literally the minute I got there, my parents dropped me off my freshman year, to after I graduated, I still stayed involved with the club and with Dr. Hobbs throughout his whole life. Here's a letter that I sent my parents in 1992, telling them about my first publication that came out, sending it to them and telling them I was working on my other one. the next one, and that was my freshman year. So Dr. Hobbs had a really important impact on the fact that, you know, we have to share what we do. And he was the first one who really pushed and made me realize, and it's stuck with me my whole life, that we're doing it for the world. We have to be able to communicate with this. He was also obviously a champion because he was very supportive, although there were times when he wasn't as supportive as he could have been. Like in class, when we were taking a presentation class and we were practicing our presentations in front of the rest of the group, he would sit there and record the number of times you said, you know, After 5 minutes, I sit down, and he was like, very good, Annette. You only said 80 times. And I'm like, you're so mean. Because it was like in the front of the whole class, and it was the worst. But it stuck as a lesson. We have to communicate clearly. We have to communicate clearly in writing. We have to communicate clearly in our speech, and it stuck. Horton was an amazing professor and had such a lasting impact, not just to myself, but to everybody who was involved with him, whether you were a student or a friend or you caved with him, particularly here in the Virginias, but pretty much everywhere. Being a WUS, a Wittenberg University Speleological Society, I want to clarify, a WUS, provided us a lot of early lessons. And for me, as one of the leaders, it taught me how to plan events successfully, like caving trips or reunions, taught me how to feed people, because happy, well-fed people, particularly on expeditions, are people that want to continue to participate and be with you. If you starve them to death or feed them crap, they are not going to come back and they will not want to keep participating. So I learned my lesson very early that you always had more than enough food on an expedition, and it was always well planned, and you always needed to tell them where we're going and what we're doing, and the timing better be right. One of the things that I'm still fascinated by in looking back through all the archive pictures is that they let 18-year-olds check out very huge vans at universities. There's a lot of pictures of us, you know, pulling up to the roadside and, you know, getting all of our gear on. This picture was actually done by me. I ran it off the road because somebody was coming down this one-lane road and I got it really stuck. It wasn't the only time that happened, but you know, like the responsibility they give 18 and 19-year-olds used to be a lot. And for me, I always had to drive because I felt so responsible for every single human in that van. And I still kind of do that today. I still kind of hoard the driving because I love it. But man, 18-year-olds driving big vehicles is something that they don't do hardly anymore. The other thing that you learn is how to be a facilitator. So a documentarian is also a really big one, because you have events, you have people, and you want somebody to always be taking pictures, because sometimes when you're participating in an event, you don't necessarily want to take a picture. You're too busy doing something else. So it's really important to have those people in your clubs and your groups to be the documentarians, the ones who record it, to save the newspaper clippings. And I kind of learned how to do that from being in the caving club as an undergraduate. And sometimes you don't want things recorded, like my fashion. As an undergrad, it hasn't really changed much because I still probably have some of these clothes in my closet. I tend to not buy clothes often, and when I was a poor undergrad and then a graduate student, I didn't buy clothes, so I looked homeless. You could tell the vintage based on what clothes I had on in the caving pictures that somebody else had taken. So here is my freshman year, and I've got my dad's old construction helmet, a coon hunting light, some weird orthopedic knee pads, I'm not quite sure where they came from, work gloves, and then, you know, my fashion got progressively worse as things got rattier and holier. I took hand-me-downs, so my senior year, I had my best caving outfit ever, which was this orange fire jumpsuit. At first I thought it was a prison suit, but that would have been weird. But it was a fire company's jumpsuit, and orange was my favorite color, so I wore the hell out of that. When I saved up enough money, I bought an orange helmet, Joe Brown, still have it. I don't use it, it's very cracked, it's very old. And everybody here probably is in a caving club or grotto or has a group of people where you have lots of pictures like this. And you know, you learn how to be a family member, you learn how to be a friend, you learn how to trust each other. These are people that know whether you like tomatoes on your hamburger, right? Like they know you better than your actual genetic family sometimes, and it's amazing. And I learned how to be a better person in general by these caving club members. And of course, when they leave, you get, really sad. I also learned how to be a partner. So I have a confession to make. If you have seen the NSS news from April, you might have been a little bit surprised by the story that was told about me. So I want to set the record straight, because it generated a lot of texts and a lot of emails to me. The NSS news editors, in their new layout, they had to shorten the story, and in shortening the story, they changed some things. So I want to clarify who my spouse actually is. So if my real spouse, or anyone who wants to claim to be my spouse, would feel like the need to stand up, that would be great, so that I could recognize them. Anyway, there he is. Yeah, I got it in the mail, and the first thing you do is you open it up. Oh, there's the article, and I started reading, and I was like, oh no, I have to call Serban, because they didn't call Scott, my husband. The name kind of gives it away. And of course, it was funny. We had a laugh. When I started Wittenberg, Scott was a senior, geology major. I was a freshman, geology major. And he was my tutor, but that was kind of it. He went off to graduate school for 2 years and got a master's at Penn State in geology. And then he moved back home to Dayton, and I was still undergrad at Wittenberg, 4 years, 2 years. And so he started hanging around with the caving club, and eventually we ended up married in 1995. And that was after I started graduate school at the University of Cincinnati, and it was like in November. So after graduate school, and everybody's like, what are you doing this weekend? Oh, I'm getting married. They were like, what? Like, okay, that's weird. But it had to be done. We did it. So the person that the news said that I married was Serban Sarbu. And I did spend a lot of time with Serban, and I still, talk to him today, but we weren't friends like that. No offense or anything. He's a great man. But one of the perks that I had as being a grotto president, and particularly a university grotto president, was that I got to meet such amazing people. And Serban was a graduate student at the University of Cincinnati, and I heard about his research, which was studying an ecosystem in a cave in Romania that had just been discovered. And it was discovered in 1986, but Romanian evolution, overturning communism, and then rebuilding a country kind of made it slow to do research there. And he ended up in the United States, and then eventually the University of Cincinnati. We had him come to give a talk at the grotto meeting, and he brought this gigantic projector with these huge glass slides and showed us pictures from the Movile Cave, and which is now there's lots of documentaries about it, and it was top 10 discoveries in Discovery magazine in 1993 and stuff like that. But it was amazing. Also, beautiful caves in Romania, beautiful places, and I just thought, oh my gosh, I have to do this. So he really was a champion for me and encouraged me to apply to graduate school at Cincinnati, and then to join the project and to study the geology. Most of the work has been on the biology end of it, but not really on the geologic history. So I said okay, and I did it. At the time, in the early 1990s, geomicrobiology as a field was pretty fringe, because you were either a biologist, or you were a geologist, or you were a microbiologist mostly focused on humans and health, maybe agriculture. But you weren't taking geology and biology or microbiology and doing them all, because that was really hard. And you also needed to know chemistry to be able to speak the language between biology, life, and rocks, not life. And so the community was pretty small, but the Karst Waters Institute knew how cool this field was and up and coming, they had a conference in 1994 in Colorado Springs, Colorado, that was for the breakthroughs in karst geomicrobiology and redox geochemistry. And really, cave and karst community was right there at the beginning of studying life in the subsurface, life on other planets potentially living in the subsurface, but also what was really hot at the time was sulfidic caves, sulfuric acid speleogenesis, and the recognition that life played a role in how these caves formed, like Carlsbad Caverns in New Mexico or Lechuguilla Cave, which incidentally was discovered the same year as Movile Cave in 1986. There were sulfidic caves that had living microorganisms in them, microbial mats, the caves smelled like hydrogen sulfide, and then there were the caves that were sort of dry and dead, like Carlsbad Caverns. And caving community and karst geomicrobiology and geochemistry sort of paired it together and said, this dead cave was formed by the processes that we can study in these living caves. And so that's where Movile Cave fit in, and that's where I was like, I gotta do it. This is where I gotta go. So I was asked earlier this week whether I had big words in my talk, and this is the biggest. Chemolithoautotrophy. And I'll break down what it means. But so just a little chemistry lesson, I am a professor. Hydrogen sulfide reacts with oxygen in the atmosphere and makes sulfuric acid. Now we know how to do this without life. This happens all the time, especially when really high hydrogen sulfide environments. We know that this is a pretty aggressive acid when we put it on a rock, like a carbonate rock, like limestone. And microorganisms are capable of doing this too. They can take hydrogen sulfide in the atmosphere or in water, and they can take oxygen from the atmosphere or in water and generate acid and essentially do this beneath their cell. And these microbes, this is a picture from Movile Cave in one of the air bells. This is sulfidic groundwater, so it has high hydrogen sulfide. This air bell actually has reduced oxygen concentration, so it's not at atmospheric levels. And there's methane and high CO2 gas in here. And all this mungy stuff around these PVC tubes is microbial mat as thin as tissue paper, sort of suspended across the surface of the water, just sort of floating there. And then the rock beneath the water surface is coated and everything. The organisms that are responsible for this acid production are similar to ones that were discovered at the deep sea hydrothermal vents. And that was in the late 1970s. And we know that they live down there in the dark too. Not quite as dark as what we can get in a cave, but pretty dark. You know, there's incident light and sunlight, and there's also such weird reactions that happen that produce light. But they live in a process called chemosynthesis. So they use chemical energy to live and not sunlight. And that chemical energy that they use allows them to take CO2, carbon dioxide, from the atmosphere and make organic matter. Now, we are like cows. We have to eat something that was made by somebody else. We eat plants, we eat a cow. That energy is a part of how we are, humans, and how our metabolism works. These bacteria, they can make their own carbon. They don't need to eat somebody else's. They can make it themselves from chemicals. So the chemical part, chemo, litho is rock, auto is self, and trophy is feeding. Self-feeding rock eaters. Sulfur bacteria, that's the biggest word of the day. So the Movile Cave is pretty interesting. It was discovered from an artificial shaft that was dug towards the coastside in the Black Sea, and it requires rappelling down about 20 meters, maybe less. And once inside, it's a pretty small cave. It's only a couple hundred feet long, and it's mostly crawling. But the real draw was the animals. So when Serban went into the cave with the state geologist, Christy Lascu, in the 80s, they found all kinds of critters crawling around. Also, the air in the cave was so different than the surface. This was basically a time capsule that was stuck and then punctured like with a straw. And within years, they were able to go in there and collect animals and then memorialize them on stamps for their country. Everything from spiders to leeches living in the cave. It's one of the most biodiverse groundwater systems that we can get into Movile Cave and then access. In 1997, Serban published part of his dissertation work in Science magazine, which is like our most notable, one of our most high-ranked journals in the country, in the world. Everybody wants a science paper. And it basically documenting this was the first chemosynthetically based ecosystem on land, basically in the continents. And it was to contrast that ocean deep sea vent discovery. Because all of these animals living in the cave were completely dependent on the microbiology from the cave, and there being chemosynthesis. So I spent almost 5 years in the summers going to Romania, and my experience as being a WUS member really allowed me to just jump right in on these expeditions because I knew exactly where to fit in. We had a field station that was built with some government money and private donations, that they had public talks in the upper area, and then we lived and worked in the bottom part of it. And there was a little lab, and on any one of the expeditions it was like a mystery of which scientists were going to be there. And here's a picture of Dave Culver's back. Some of you may know Dave from Caving in the Virginias. In 2000, the last time I was there, it was also part of one of the best conferences I ever attended in my life. And some of you I met at this conference in 2000, the Friends of Karst that was in Cluj. And it was I had been to one of the first international congresses of speleology in 1997 in La Chaux-de-Fonds, Switzerland, and that was cool. But this Friends of Karst that Romania threw was amazing. It was over 120 scientists from 20 countries. All of us went on the field trips, and it was really one of the most amazing experiences. So I started from undergrad, I did a geology master's, finished that, and then I started a biology master's degree, working on the same project, but going to some of these other sulfur caves, like the Frasassi caves in Italy, Cesspool Cave in Virginia, which definitely smells like it sounds. And then I learned how to also do a lot of experiments that as a geologist, a trained geologist, I didn't know. And so that was why I wanted to do the biology degree, so I could learn genetics and these genetic tools that were being developed at the time. And again, this was the early to mid 90s, so molecular tools and advancements were just now coming on. So the use of polymerase chain reaction, which of course everybody on the planet knows about that from COVID testing, PCR, that was just being developed and applied to environmental systems at this time. So to be there right at the ground floor was pretty amazing. In my experience doing field work also helped me interface with the PIs. So they received a National Science Foundation grant. The late Tom Kane, he passed away about 20 years ago now. Brian Kinkle, he just is retiring. Also Bill Jones was on this expedition, so there's Bill Jones. And I put on in trying to reconstruct the timing, about 250 to 300 hours in Movile Cave. Now, that might sound pretty low, but this cave kind of is ratty. We weren't wearing respirators. We didn't realize how toxic the gases were, but the CO2, the carbon dioxide in the atmosphere is really high, and you could only spend about an hour there in full conscience, knowing what you had to do. And after 2 hours, you started to get tired, or you started to get angry and fight somebody, like literally, like, that's not what we're doing today, we're doing this experiment. And they're like, no, we don't have that gear. I mean, it was just, your brain went off. And so we really had to limit the time to maybe no more than 3, definitely no more than 4 hours. And most of the time we were in there for less than 1 hour at a time, just based on the conditions. And it's pretty hot because then you have to climb back out. But luckily it's open to the atmosphere at that point, so it's not so bad. The same project had Megan Porter join, and she was a Wittenberg student, and she also went to the University of Cincinnati. She joined the project to study the microbial carbon that the organisms were fixing in the cave. And it was great because I knew her, and they basically put us together all the time. We had to do everything together because we were the girls and we were the only women, and it was just all these other men. And so it was like, oh, the girls are here, the girls do this, the girls go to the market, the girls are cooking dinner, but it was great because we basically became sisters, and we've been caving and doing work ever since. And you'll see her pop back up here towards the end when I talk about Hawaii. From Cincinnati, I started the PhD program at the University of Texas at Austin, and I worked with Phil Bennett, who just retired. He was a geochemist, and also did geomicrobiology, but I really wanted to work with him because he said, hell yes, when I said, I want to study caves, and I want to study microbiology, and I want to probably do it in Wyoming. He was the only professor I talked to in looking for PhD programs who said yes. Okay, that was it, you know, it was a done deal. We ended up picking the Lower King Caves in Wyoming, not from the historical importance, because Lower King Caves were the first ones in the 1970s to be recognized as being formed through sulfuric acid dissolution, speleogenesis, but because it was expensive to go to Romania. It was expensive to go to Italy. It was expensive to go to some of these other places. It still is, and it's also very difficult and challenging. It takes days to coordinate. Plus the caves were, you have to rappel and do all these things. The Lower King Cave, you just walk in. I mean, actually you slither, the entrance is pretty small. But you could basically do work pretty efficiently. And after 9/11 happened, it made it even easier to do the work because you couldn't fly as a scientist to Europe easily with all your data loggers and sensors and wires and batteries and vials and tubes and chemistry and all this stuff. You couldn't do it. So it was fortuitous for me to say I wanted to do it in the US, but also quite pragmatic. We ended up with a National Science Foundation grant from the Life in Extreme Environments program, and that pretty much funded most of my dissertation work. So the same equation, hydrogen sulfide with oxygen. What we were doing was focusing on the microbial mats. So there's a couple of springs that discharge into the cave passage that have hydrogen sulfide in them, and also a little bit of methane, and also sulfur gases like dimethyl sulfide or mercaptans or carbonyl sulfide. So in these sulfur gases have like a weird smell, like garlic sometimes, kind of asparagus-y, but you know, so you have this rotten egg and you have all these weird gases. So we definitely had to wear respirators when we worked in this cave. And we also had really high radon concentrations to deal with. And part of the discovery of this cave happened to be because of the nearby uranium deposits. So, you know, in the course of a day, the Geiger counters were just always going off. And most of the emissions were coming from the water itself, not from the rocks. So one of the things, you'll see, here's Culver and Hobbs, they helped out, and Megan. We did a lot of expeditions, a lot of focusing on the studies. This instrument in the background is a gas chromatograph, and they cost about $30,000 to $40,000. There was no way for us to measure the gases in the cave back at the hotel, because hydrogen sulfide and these other sulfur gases are horrible to study. They're sticky, they stick to the plastic, and they would essentially oxidize with the oxygen in the sample vial by the time we would get back to the hotel. So we had the idea, well, we'll just bring the truck with the gas chromatograph to the end of the trail, which was basically a railroad track, and we'll leave the cave, run 2 kilometers really fast down the track, and measure the samples. But in that time, the gas would be gone. So it was like, there's only one thing we can do. We take the gas chromatograph to the samples. So we hauled in a GC, laptop, hydrogen gas, like a little welding tank, also a generator. We also paid for an undergrad who just got out of the Army to be the Sherpa for the generator, because it was like 60 pounds, 70 pounds. The GC weighed about 50 pounds, and about 300 feet of electrical cord. And you know, you have to start with the big stuff and then go smaller and smaller so that like you don't lose the charge along that whole distance. And got our data. I mean, if you've seen the movie The Martian, we scienced the shit out of it. Because, and I mean, this was before the book was written too, so maybe it was inspired by it. But like, we had to think of other ways to do the science, and I've been doing that ever since. How to do MacGyver moves, how to trust that you can measure, if you can run a GC in a lab or in the back of a car, you can run it in a cave if you just know what you're doing. You have to be careful about condensation. You have to be careful about the corrosion. We basically, anything that didn't get hot, we covered with saran wrap, you know, and sealed all the ports. And here's an idea you may want to take with you. So in order to filter water samples, now we use a caulk gun. So we're not, putting caulk around a toilet or something. We're basically putting our syringe in the caulk gun and a filter into a bottle. So we're always thinking of new ways to do science and to do things more efficiently and to maybe save some energy in the process. Overall, that dissertation work took me 4.5 years. I was at Texas for 5 years, and I discovered a new genetic family of bacteria, which was pretty cool. The closest relatives were from the deep sea vents. Since then, the group has been elevated to a whole separate class of bacteria. And the experimental work that I did, and you can just see, these are some of the members of the bacteria world on a rock surface, and they've etched out just kind of living what they do, bringing in CO2, using hydrogen sulfide, generating sulfuric acid. They dissolve the rock beneath them. And, this sulfuric acid speleogenesis, stimulated or enhanced or facilitated by microorganisms, we now know happens all over the world. We also know it happens in aquifers. We also know there's other types of acids, not just sulfuric acids, that can be used. In thinking about my career, my history, it's kind of disappointing that that this work kind of stalled out. Like nobody picked up on it, so it's just still sitting there for somebody to do more of. And as somebody that probably had undiagnosed ADD or ADHD, I just was bored with it, and I needed to do something else. I needed to use the tools that I learned, but I needed to apply them in different ways. So now I'm looking back and going, well, there's still work to be done. We can go back and start right where we picked off, essentially. And if you want to join, please do. From here, I went and accepted a position at Louisiana State University, traded in my cowboy hat for Mardi Gras beads. And it was a great position because it was a joint position between the geology and the biology department. So it was purposefully designed for me to teach geology and biology classes, and to also work and have students doing research that was at that interdisciplinary or transdisciplinary boundary. And we did a lot of caving, but it was a pretty long drive from everywhere, coming from Baton Rouge. Literally the minute my chair got warm at LSU, the Karst Institute came knocking. And I am so appreciative for that, because one of the things we do as professors is we have to contribute back to the community and to help each other. And having started my job in 2004 and then starting as one of the board of directors in 2005, my department head had no idea what to do with that. Assistant professors do not serve on boards. They don't know anybody. I knew all these people. They were my idols. They still are my idols, right? So being able to work with them as an assistant young professor and having the training that I had from being a wuss and going to conferences, organizing conferences, having events, knowing how much food to buy, how to drive people in the truck, that kind of thing, all helped with working with the Karst Institute. And I'll say that one of the lasting contributions from the KWI is their publications from conferences. And if you haven't heard yet, you can hear it here now. Their publications all went free online. In the era of sharing public information and science and getting science out to the public, all of the past conferences are now online. Go to karstwaters.org and you can download the whole book and read it to your heart's content. So it's really nice to see that. After about a year of being at LSU as well, and being bored with what I was doing for my PhD, I wanted to go back to Texas. And having lived in Austin, I knew about the Edwards Aquifer, and Gary Schindel was working at the Edwards Aquifer Authority at the time, so I gave him a ring and said, I'd like to check out some of these deep wells that are in the Edwards Aquifer, which is a deep karst aquifer. This is a picture representing San Antonio. It's there in central Texas. I'll show you a map in a second. And he said, come on down and show me really big, really deep wells. Now the Edwards Aquifer in central Texas, so here's Texas, here's central Texas, here's sort of the Edwards Aquifer. San Antonio's in Bexar County, sort of here. And this is a map of these counties blown up showing the connectivity or water quality. So yellow is fresh water, and then the sort of brown is water that not a cow won't even drink this water. It's bad water. They call it bad water. And this little green line that sort of comes through here is the bad water line, or the freshwater saline water interface. And this was pretty fascinating to me because saline water here is also sulfitic, and there's stories of old sulfur mineral resorts and spas and stuff like that was in the San Antonio area where they were thriving off of this sulfitic water coming up. You know, in the early 1900s, they don't flow anymore. But in the aquifer, this is saline sulfitic water. And I was like, It also co-occurs with a whole bunch of really cool aquifer or groundwater adapted, obligate, blind animals that have a very ancient history that go back to the Cretaceous, or at least the Paleocene, Eocene, which is about 55 million years. So it's a very ancient, very highly developed. These are fish, catfish. This one's like Satan is its genus name, Satan. And it's one of the most diverse, if not the most diverse groundwater ecosystems in the world. And I wanted to know what they ate. Did they have microorganisms on their diet, you know, on their plate at night? And when you think about the aquifer, I like this picture because it really shows how that water chemistry really exists, probably in the subsurface, but not to this like dramatic extent. So this is a scuba diver in a coastal, you know, cave where you have the freshwater lens floating on the saline and sometimes sulfitic water, like the ocean water. And this interface, you know, an organism can swim across this interface, this water interface. It doesn't really care as long as it can survive down here without a lot of oxygen. The waters don't really mix chemically. So within the aquifer, you get this stratification and you get this boundary. And this boundary is pretty narrow. It's a few kilometers at most, or at some of the widths, like sort of in this area, it's really, really narrow, very, very steep. But microorganisms love this boundary because they have hydrogen sulfide or methane coming from below, they've got oxygen coming from above, and they love that. And so maybe they're chemosymbiotic, maybe they're chemolithoautotrophic, and they're supporting some of these wacky little animals that are living down in the aquifer. So when Gary let me work with some of his team at the Edwards Aquifer Authority, and here on the left, let me get back over here, we have a camera that was sent down one of these deep wells. Is it low? Why isn't that going? There it goes. And we sought boreholes that didn't have metal casing all the way down. So the drillers drilled through the carbonate, and then the casing, the metal casing stops, and then it's just open limestone from there. And what you see on the right is the fuzzy wall of the aquifer, like an inside-out teddy bear. And I've been showing these for 18 years, and I still can't believe this. Like, it's still so exciting to me to see that there's all this filamentous-y stuff that we see, like just like in the caves, and all these organisms. And of course, I had graduate students studying them. We used genetic tools to characterize the microbiology, and then also to study the carbon. But that didn't tell me what was for dinner. So after, I think it was like 2009 or 2010, I met up with Ben Schwartz, who just became a new professor at Texas State, and he had a new graduate student, Benjamin Hutchins, and Ben Squared, as I called them. We're working on Ben's thesis dissertation to study basically the aquifer ecology, these organisms, what was, you know, who was eating whom in the aquifer. And they used the chemical tracers of carbon and nitrogen and found essentially that there is microbial, there's a base of carbon that the microbes generate, and that is all of this sort of well fauna, all of the animals that we pull out of the wells from the deep aquifer. And then there's a separate sort of shallow system that's dependent on the photosynthesis from the surface. So we essentially have pandas eating green grass in part of the aquifer, and we have slime eaters in the deep aquifer. And essentially, you know, up to 30 to 40% of some of the animals in the aquifer are dependent on this chemical energy in the bacteria from the aquifer itself, this microbial, and it's separated from the surface. There's no photosynthesis. Why do we care about this? Because of conservation. So from a conservation perspective, it's really important to know what animals eat. This is the Barton Springs salamander, and during COVID, we had a project to study the northern, Ben squared, we had a project to study the northern segment of the Edwards Aquifer where the Barton Springs salamander lives, and it was, is there any microbial base to its diet? Does it eat animals that are from the deep aquifer that depend on bacteria? And yeah, there's some percentage, but it's not as high as we would hope, but it could be diluted for a lot of reasons. But by studying what these animals eat and whether there's a buffer, right? Because if an organism is dependent on another animal to eat it in the shallow subsurface, and that shallow subsurface gets contaminated or polluted from a oil well or a truck overthrown or something, then all of a sudden that diet is completely wiped out. But what this project is saying is that there's bacteria that's supporting some base that this animal can eat. And all of a sudden we extend the conservation effort from not just the spring, but the entire aquifer straight down to the center of the earth, essentially, of like wherever this food could be for that animal. And this holistic approach is something that's being done now in more conservation biology, is understanding not just what this, not saving just the salamander, but saving the entire system that the salamander lives in. From one charismatic animal to another, I changed places in the process of this, and I moved to TAG. And we wanted to be closer to family in Ohio, but we also wanted to be closer to caves. I don't know if you know this, but there are no caves in Louisiana. So it was a pretty far drive from everywhere. But we were also closer to active grottos and to OTR and all that good stuff. I think just like the Karst Waters Institute, as soon as my chair got warm, I got a call from Joey Fagan saying, will you be on the board of the Cave Conservancy of the Virginias? So I turned in my stuff and ran for election and got elected. And that was also really fun because I got to meet a lot of people that I hadn't worked with before or interacted with, from the Virginias. And then from there, I started working with the Cave Conservancy Foundation, and I'm now working as the coordinator for the grants and fellowships. So if you have graduate students out there who need money for their research, I'm the person to send your application to. And the deadline is May 1st. It's typically always May 1st, 2024. And their application materials are on their website at the Cave Conservancy. .index or something, I can't see it. But please do it. There's also an undergrad program that Dan Fong runs, and I really think it's real money. It's a lot of money, up to $20,000 for PhD students, which is a ton of money in a year, and they can use it for whatever they want. And I love being a part of this, this effort to help support graduate research. The work that I started at Tennessee was kind of in this realm of biospeleology, and I started it with Matt Niemiller, who was a postdoc at the time. He had just finished his PhD from Tennessee, and he was postdocing in Kentucky and a couple of other places, and I was kind of curious about the history of biology in the state of Tennessee. Most of the work had been done in the Cumberland Plateau, and basically nobody cared about the thousands of caves in East Tennessee. There was only about 5% of all the known caves in Tennessee in the eastern side, so the Appalachian Valley and Ridge, and also in northern Alabama and Georgia, that had ever been studied for biology. We didn't even know where bats were in some of those caves, or that even some caves had bats. So in 2013, we got out all of the biospeleologists we could. So we have Dan Fong joined us from the DC area, now retired. Megan Porter came. Steve Taylor, you might know, he was from Illinois, now retired. And then also Mike Slay from Arkansas, working for the Nature Conservancy, came out and we surveyed some of these caves and found new species within a week. We found new distributions, we found bats, we found new salamander populations we didn't know about. And we applied to the Cave Conservancy Foundation and were able to do about 100 caves in a 2-year period and find all of this amazing stuff. So in the state of Tennessee, we didn't know that we had cave-adapted snails until this project, and we were able to name one of them, Antrobus tennesseeensis, which for the University of Tennessee. But also we found new stuff that we're still describing today, and it's going to take a while. So I don't know if you know this, but once we find things, which is really easy, you just have to look, right? In caves, if you go, no one's ever seen it, you've seen it now, and you just discovered it. No one knew it, and now you found it. Well, we're really good at finding things. About every year, we discover about 10,000 new species, and that's globally, everybody in every environment. And we also lose about 10,000. The problem is that it takes an average of 21 years for us to describe a new species. And if it's aquatic, it goes a little bit faster. If it's terrestrial, like a spider, it may never happen. So the average is 21 years, which means that from an extinction rate perspective, in an ecosystem that's really at risk from like being bulldozed, for example, or contaminated, but next to a highway, we're losing some species before we can even describe them. So it really, like from a worldwide problem, we need to get more young people involved in this part of biology. Not just the discovery part, everybody's really excited about discovering, but also the tedious work of dissecting it, counting the hairs on the legs, or the eyeball holes, or like whatever they do. I'm not a taxonomist, but I can tell you, you need to be one if you're not already. You get to use microscopes, so if your eyes are bad, it's all good too. The other thing that I did when I was at Tennessee was I got to participate in a commercial. And this commercial aired on every network, every Saturday, all fall for years. And it was really, they wanted to do it in a cave. They're like, can you be in a cave? And we want to put it in there, and then you can sing the part of the song that says, down in the Tennessee hills. Like down in the Tennessee hills, like a cave. I was like, that's brilliant, but I'm gonna do something. I'm gonna do science. I need to be doing science. So in the clip, got blue gloves on, I'm swabbing a speleothem, and I'm singing like a crazy person, down in the Tennessee hills, right? So when I was, oh, I'm not gonna sing the whole thing. You are gonna go sing the whole thing. Because when I talked to Diana Northrup, when she did her Luminary, apparently the audience helped sing for her so that she wasn't so scared. So we're gonna sing. I told her we were gonna sing this little ditty that hopefully you know. Play the telephone bills. Oh wait. Rocky Top.
Home sweet home to me.
Home sweet home to me. Good old Rocky Top. Woo! I heard one. I heard a woo. That was a lot of fun, and I got a lot of thank you. My high school chorus teachers would be so thrilled. I always got speaking roles. I never got to sing. Maybe there was a reason for that. But it's also giving back, right? For the world. You wouldn't believe the press that we got from like, was that you in a cave? My students, my Geology 101 students coming up to me afterwards, was that you in the commercial? Oh, like tell me about it. It was so awesome to be doing this. And again, for the world, right? We have to put ourselves out there and share this experience for the world. So in the last few minutes of my talk, I wanted to tell you about this new venue change that I have had over the last few years, since 2017, and to sort of leave you with some thoughts in how you do like your for the world. How are you taking what you do and sharing it with others? And I'll tell you that this project in Hawaii came at a really good time. So it may look wonderful to be a professor at a university, a big R1, Research 1 institution, but sometimes it's joyless. I mean, I'm just gonna be brutally honest, you're all my friends, my family. It's joyless sometimes. You have to write grant proposals, it's a constant drag. You're always getting turned down. You're getting papers rejected. You have students that don't do their homework. It's just like this, sometimes it's just such a burden to do the work, because you can be as excited and energetic as you want to, but you do depend on other people for progress, for completion of projects. The Hawaii project came before COVID, which I'm really glad for, and then it's been continuing throughout COVID, as ended, apparently. And it came at a really good time because burnout was really high. And so I really think that, sometimes it's great to just pick up and start something totally new to you, because it does let some things settle and other things come into perspective. And one of the things that the project did was it made me more aware of other humans on the planet, including indigenous people. So I'd always had an appreciation for indigenous peoples of the country, of every country. But being able to work in the Hawaiian Islands, the native Hawaiians were the first cavers in the Hawaiian Islands. They were the explorers. They went into the caves for shelter. They went into caves for water. They buried their dead in caves, and their land was stolen, and now it's occupied by guests and colonialists, and that's me. Like balancing that, knowing that I'm a colonialist, knowing I'm a settler, white, and having to study, wanting to study caves in the Hawaiian Islands, and balance that Western science approach with native traditional practices and respect. Caves are sacred to native Hawaiians, so having to convince them that what we do is worth it. We care about the land. We want to help conserve and protect it, but we also need to study it. And like what I was saying about the species descriptions, we can't protect habitats or animals that we don't know names for. No one is going to write a plan for protection if they don't know the genus and species name of an animal. So we need to learn this. We need to study it. And it made me more aware of how to communicate with people that were not like me, and to make me more appreciative of the sacrifices that cultures and other humans have made in order for me to do the work that I do. The project started, Christy and Mike Slay got married, and as good cavers do, they go caving on their honeymoon. And their honeymoon was on the Big Island, the Hawaiian Island, the Big Island, and the Hawaiian Islands. And this is a picture from a publication that they wrote of this bug that they found called a thread-legged bug in a cave that shouldn't have been in this cave. Previously, this animal, and here's what it looks like as an adult, it's very, very tiny. It looks amazing on the screen, I know, but it's very small. This thread-legged bug had been known on the other side of the volcano, Mauna Loa, and at very, very high elevations. They discovered it in the Hawaiian Ocean View Estate's big cave system, the Kupuna Kanahina system, in Kulakai Caverns, the tourist section of the cave. And they thought, gosh, we need to study these systems more. Like, this animal shouldn't be here. Are there other animals that we didn't know were here? So the whole project got started. Megan Porter accepted a professorship at the University of Hawaii in Honolulu. And, it really was now we know we have a friend that's in Hawaii, and we have to go see her every year. Like this, we need to go Thanksgiving, now maybe spring break, now maybe 3 times a year. All of a sudden it just blew up as far as a project. And for those of you who haven't been to Hawaii, I recommend that you go. As a caving, it's all lava tubes. It's a landscape on the Hawaiian Islands that's being constantly regenerated. Most of the caves are all less than 1,000 years old. So the evolution of these life forms is very fast, very exotic. This is a plant hopper, cave-adapted plant hopper that's sucking the sap out of a native tree. I think the batteries are dying. The tree roots come down into the lava tubes, and all of these animals are all taken pictures. All these pictures were taken by Mike Slay, and they're all from a cave they shouldn't have been in, or that we didn't know they should be in. So all these new discoveries, and many of them have no names. We don't, like the genetics, the time, remember average of 21 years, this is only, some of these have only been seen since 2019. So the biospeleology session tomorrow, I'm gonna talk a little bit about the gaps in the science, and then like sort of where we're at in some of the species descriptions and what these organisms can be. And it's pretty exciting to know that like you just saw something that no one else in the world saw ever, or we also find rare things that had only been seen since 1956, and no one has ever seen one since. Again, how do you protect something that you don't know was supposed to be there, or that you didn't know its name? So the ohana, my Hawaii ohana means family, and team is translated as hui. So we have our new team, and that back acronym or whatever that was from the talk earlier today, we came up with HI CAVE acronym, which stands for Hawaiian Investigations of Caves and Volcanospeleological experiences or expeditions or something. I don't know. It's just like it was an acronym we wanted to make a name for. But we have had a lot of people, and also, if you didn't know, Hawaii has, and particularly the Hawaiian Ocean View Estates, has a caver commune, and there are lots of cavers that live full-time or part-time there, like Peter and Ann Bosted and John and Mary Wilson. And they were so gracious to take Scott and me in and help with this project. Thomas Hoff and Vita have been instrumental in helping us find caves and go caving and you know, getting you know, lodging figured out, dinners, and you know, all this stuff, driving, who's driving, you know, that kind of thing. So it's been really great. And the Hawaii Grotto has been reestablished, and I'm on the board of that because my chair got warm here too. And I recommend you thinking about coming for Cave Week. And you can come to see these systems, and it's usually in the spring, sort of late January, early February. It's a perfect time to go to Hawaii, not be in the snow, like particularly in the Northeast. You can find all that information out on Facebook for Cave Week. Also, as part of the project, I joined the board of the Cave Conservancy of Hawaii, and their mission to protect and conserve the land there really aligns well with my own desire to help conserve and protect, and also do the science. So, and they support the science, but they also, you know, need to keep working with the Native Hawaiian communities because their missions are aligning, right? And someday they should converge, and we can all work towards a common goal of finding ways to protect the land in a more coherent way. So in my last minute, I just wanted to say thanks for coming. And you know, there's a couple of things about being a luminary speaker. One, when Gary asks you, because you know he's going to make his rounds all, you know, for the next, I don't know how many years. He said he needs help too to get ideas. But it's a little bit depressing to do this. I'll be honest, it's fun, this is great. But looking back at these old pictures and thinking about the past, I don't feel like I'm like in the back seat of my life. I still feel like I'm driving. I'm still in the front seat. So to think back about this last 30, 40 years of my life and then go, gosh, I'm only 50. I still have a lot left. And I hope I have a lot left because I have students that have just, you know, I've got students in the audience, right? So it's like, I hope they don't think I'm at the end, right? This is my career. I'm glad you joined the lab. You know, and with my students, they're very inspirational, and I'm very grateful for them to want to go and do all these things with me. And you know, in the education system now seems sometimes like a void, a vacuum of knowledge. And so for me, having students that are curious, they want to go crawl in caves, they want to do all this research, I love it. It's very inspiring, and it makes me feel less depressed. I'm also not depressed when I think about my collaborators. Some of you guys are sitting out there, and I really love that because, you know, you can't do it alone, and it's awesome. And you know, these are relationships that you generate over a lifetime, and then you look back and you're like, that was 20 years ago? Whoa, okay, all right. And I can't forget the ride or die, Scott, right? I think we still have a lot. I hope. Dragging him through experiences like this may make him a little bit question what he's doing, but yeah, there's still a lot left, and there's a lot of aloha to share, and there's a lot of thinking that we all should do, and thanking each other more. And so with that, I just want to say thanks for coming. Think about it for the world. I have some sweets. I want to spread some aloha. Happy to talk to you. I'm around. These sweets are going to go on the Cave Conservancy of Hawaii booth out there in the room, in the salon room, if you want them. And thanks. We have time for questions? We have time for questions, apparently. I thought I was going to talk right up to the end.
Possession of the room is 9/10 of the law.
Possession is 9/10 of the law, yeah.
I do have one question.
Oh, you have a question?
What's the legacy of Dr. Hobbs? Is the WUS still active?
I knew somebody was going to ask me. So Gary's question is the legacy of WUS. And I checked last night on the NSS's website, and there's a link. And you can email generally the biology department at Wittenberg University. My own department disappeared. And one of my former professors, John Ritter, has been taken into the environmental studies program that basically they got rid of the geology program. And he's listed as the advisor, but then that was like from 2022. So I'm not too sure who's there. There's a couple of people that are listed as officers that may graduate in 2024, but I don't know the history. Yeah.
Well, it's a great legacy.
Yeah, it's a great legacy. Thank you. Yes?
Your voice recognition software that's at the bottom of the screen does really well with the scientific interpretations. Do you have an add-on to the regular vocabulary? Because it gets almost everything right except karst water answers.
I know. So the comment is about the AI software for PowerPoint. This is run in PowerPoint, and it's learning. It's AI software, so it continually learns. So I practice with it, and I practiced Karst Waters Institute, and it probably says Cursed Waters. No, there it did. It said Karst Waters Institute. There we go. Cursed. Yes. But also speleological, I just kept practicing with it. And also, like, I put the notes in it, and so it uses the words from the notes to also adapt the language. So it's a trick, but it's in PowerPoint. It's not in a separate program.
There's also karst waters.
Karst Waters. Karst, oh yeah. Karst Waters, that's good. One of my former students, Carrie Brown, some of you might know her. She, it might have a little bit of an accent as well. It would be car stereos for a while. Karst areas. So, yeah. Anything else? Well, I'm around all week, so thank you again. I appreciate it.